Hi everyone, welcome to Active Engagement Strategies for Success, Part 2, Taking the Chaos Out of Cooperative Learning. I'm Laura Candler from Teaching Resources, and many of you probably know me from my website where I have an online file cabinet for teachers. In the first part of the webinar, I shared active engagement strategies for whole group lessons and partner activities. Today's active engagement webinar is going to focus on cooperative learning teams. So let's get started. The first thing I always like to do is turn on my webcam for just a minute and give you a personal welcome. So let me do that. Hi everyone. I don't like to keep the webcam on throughout the webinar. It's kind of a little bit distracting and it's not really necessary to see me talking, but I did want to welcome everybody personally. We're going to do some few little activities to get to know each other. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself, and then I'll be covering the webinar objectives. And the main part of this webinar is going to have cooperative learning management tips and teaching strategies, and then we'll kind of come back to the whole idea of active engagement at the end. All of that will happen in 1 hour, and then the question and answer session will come after the actual hour of the webinar, and you're just free to hang around if you'd like. I always like it when people hang around during the question and answer session because a lot of times points come out at that time that I did not make in the webinar, and I wished I had, but maybe I didn't think of it, and sometimes the questions really bring out some of the finer points. So here's just a screen capture of my website, lauracandler.com. Many of you are probably familiar with that. And I do have a blog, corkboardconnections.com. My blog is where I can share things in a little more detail than I can on the website. The website has an online file cabinet that's just packed with all kinds of free resources and things that I use in my classroom. A lot of those things are not explained, but on my blog I do give more details about how I use those materials. My website is a good resource for you, but I really wanted to recommend a couple of other resources, especially for today's webinar. How many of you are familiar with Kagan? In fact, I'm going to do a question and have you use your green check or your red X. How many of you, I mean, even if you haven't had the training, maybe you've read some Kagan books, you kind of have a grasp of what it is, you know something about it. And then the X would be, maybe you've heard the name Kagan, but you're really not familiar with it. That's running about half and half. So Kagan, I was trained by Dr. Spencer Kagan many years ago in cooperative learning strategies, and his approach is a structural approach that's quite different than what was out at the time. The reason I want to bring this up is I guess I just want to recommend to you that you check out Kagan resources. I did end up writing 5 books for Kagan, and they're shown right there, but I do want to kind of throw out a disclaimer that this webinar is not a Kagan webinar, and it's not about Kagan structures, or I'm just sharing that Kagan is an outstanding resource. What I'm doing tonight is just kind of like a buzz through of some tips and management ideas and things that I used in my classroom that made things successful for me. But I highly recommend, if you can get training in the full Kagan structural approach, that you do that. It's well worth it. Another organization that you should look into is Whole Brain Teaching. This is one that I didn't know about when I was in the classroom, but I've been learning about it over the last year, and it's really outstanding. Let me clear the checks and the X's again, and if you would give me a check or an X as to whether you know something about Whole Brain Teaching. Maybe you've visited their website, you've read the Whole Brain Teaching for Challenging Kids book, or maybe even attended the conference. Wonderful management strategies, lots of great resources, and other than the book having a cost, the resources on the website are free, great videos. Even their conference, their yearly conference is a free conference, so I highly recommend that you look into that. Okay, now we want to learn a little bit about you. This is where you get to use the whiteboard tools. We may have to get those activated. If they're not working, then Peggy can turn those on for us. But if you would get the little starburst clicker and then click to show where, you'll have to double click to show where you are. And I just clicked on the map because I'm in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And let's see where everybody is. Ooh, we have people from all over the place. And some people, wow, this is awesome. If you would also type in the chat box your actual location, and for fun you might put in there, what time is it right now? We've got people who are across the globe from us, so maybe even what day is it? Who put that they were from Fayetteville? Susan. I saw Susan real quick. Okay, wonderful. It's always fun to see people from all over gathering together and sharing ideas, because you guys will be sharing your ideas too. All right, if we could clear the whiteboard before I move on and maybe turn off the whiteboard tools, that would be great, so that when we move on to the next screen and the actual presentation, we have a clear screen to work with. All righty. Okay, so let's just go through some webinar objectives. In this webinar, you're going to learn some tips for creating effective teams, explore active engagement strategies to use with cooperative learning teams. You're going to learn to make strategic decisions about cooperative learning lessons rather than just being able to read a lesson out of a book and implement it. We'll be talking about strategic things that you can do and decisions that you can make to make your cooperative learning more effective, and explore how cooperative learning leads to greater engagement. And then it's really important for you to share your own strategies and tips for increasing engagement too. One thing I did want to mention is I noticed at the beginning that we do have quite a few primary teachers, and part one of this active engagement session had a big focus on whole group engagement strategies and partner strategies that were very effective at the lower grades and at the upper grades. The strategies I'll be sharing tonight may have a little bit more of an upper elementary and higher focus. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for the primary teachers that are with us to help me out and help everyone out by sharing in the chat how you would adapt these activities at your level. My background is 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. So I know that the strategies may be adapted. It may be that things that I'm saying to do in teams, you may say, well, I would do this in partners. And some things you might say, I just don't know if it's appropriate, or maybe it would be in a guided reading or math group with an adult present and things like that. So I'll just be, if you have questions, how would you do it at a certain grade level or whatever, just post your question in the chat and somebody will probably jump in and answer. Okay, let's do a quick recap of what I covered in part one. We went into tips for getting started with cooperative learning, some basic classroom management tips. Then we did a whole big piece on tips for teaching interactively using things like dry erase boards and different apps and so on. We talked about effective strategies for partner work, and then we did a little bit of digging deeper. The effective strategies for partners that I covered, this was kind of the meat of the session. I shared about think, pair, share, and some different variations, buddy note-taking, partner practice where you're kind of passing a paper back and forth and the kids are answering and then they're checking off what the other one's doing, pairs compare, solve and switch, and math buddy chat. Those were the things that I covered. So if you missed that first session, you can go back and watch the webinar recording for that. So your turn. And I actually already asked you if you watched it, but so you can kind of disregard that first one. But if you did watch the first webinar, which strategies are you planning to use? And for those of you who are already back in school, have you already used some of the strategies that I shared in the first session? So I'm going to stop talking for a minute and see, since a lot of you were here. Oh, the Buddy Ven, the Getting to Know You Ven, Think, Pair, Share, Showdown. Somebody's already used Buddy Note-Taking. Awesome. Great. Okay. So just a little recap of what we did. So let's move on to part 2 because I've got a lot that I want to share with you. So part 2 is taking the chaos out of cooperative learning. And I'm not really going to discuss the chaos part until the very end of the webinar, and then you'll sort of see where this webinar subtitle came from. I'm going to start with some team management tips, engagement strategies for teams, digging deeper, and then going into active engagement. So let's start off with some team management tips. I'll just let you read through these. And by the way, when you see pictures of real kids, those are my students from a few years ago. I did take quite a few pictures when I was in the classroom. I think I neglected to say this time, some of you were here, many of you were here for the last time, but I did teach for 30 years before retiring a few years ago. And thankfully, I did take a lot of pictures the last few years. Okay, so let's talk about team formation. When you put kids in cooperative learning teams, you have to make decisions about how many students to put in a team. And I know that some of those decisions are made by the size of your room and what your room will tolerate in terms of room arrangements. But really, what I've found to be true is the best team size is a team of 4. And that's because you can break that group down into 2 pairs of 2 kids, and then there's lots of different variations of those, so they can be partners kind of with the person on their shoulder, or the partner with the person they're sort of face to face with. You could kind of mix it up a little bit. I say heterogeneous, meaning for the most part, like the setting that I taught in, 4th and 5th grade for the most part, I had my same students all day. And so they were in teams of 4, and they stayed that way for 4 to 6 weeks in those teams of 4, and they did a lot of things together. Now, sometimes for math or some other activity, I would reseat them with students of similar ability to do a particular activity, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. But for the most part, they were a mixture of boys, girls, different ethnic groups, just a variety of kids together, different personality types, and so on. For those of you that haven't gone back to school yet, you might consider a strategy that I've used really successfully, and that is on the first day of school, I have the kids seated randomly. I never let them just come in and sit where they want. I just feel like that's a recipe for disaster for your first day of school. So I would have name tags out, and I'd put like 2 boys and 2 girls and just kind of mix the kids up. And they stayed that way for the first day, and we did a lot of team building activities. And then the next day, I gave them new random teams. Sometimes they used a puzzle activity where they had different puzzle pieces and they had to put it together and then find their team. Sometimes I used a deck of cards. There's a lot of different ways that you can put together, but it was random on the second day, and then on the third day it was random. And what I learned from this was how the kids interacted with a wide variety of groups. And since every day we were doing lots of getting to know you activities, team builders, and those kinds of things, they were getting to know lots of kids in the class. So by the end of the third day, they all knew each other's name, and they were pretty comfortable with each other. So, and I also knew like who not to put together. So let's say you're starting back to school. I know some schools are starting on Monday. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you might do the random teams, and then you come in on Thursday morning and you have like a more strategic way of having the teams organized. And I'm about to share that with you in just a minute. So a method that worked really well for me is to use either index cards, or on my website I have a whole page on team formation, and there's some little team formation cards that you can print out, but index cards are fine. And I would put the student's name, and then at the top I would put girl or boy, And then I sometimes use color coding, like a blue dot for girl, a red dot for boys, because when I and then for notes, I might put things I notice, like maybe they're having a hard time getting along with somebody, or I know that they're struggling in reading, or whatever my notes were. Now these cards were for my use only. The students never ever got to see them, parents never got to see them, it was just for me. But after I put every child's name on an index card, I sorted them into 3 categories. So let's say I have 28 kids. I would kind of go through and say, who are my 7 strongest kids? And it might not always be academically. It might be just really good, solid kids that you know, work hard and they're very dependable and hopefully, you know, academically fairly strong. And then I would take the middle group. I would take 14 kids that were average, and then I would figure out, like, who were my 7 kids that were going to struggle. And it, like I said, it might not be totally academic, but it might be also that they just have poor social skills or something. So when I would make up my teams, I would literally just clear off a whole table or sit on the floor, and I would make, so if I had 7 teams of 4, I would lay out 7 rows with 4 in each row, and I just kind of like kept moving the cards around until I got an arrangement where I had, you know, sort of equal numbers of boys and girls and so on. And then I would write on the bottom of the card, team 1, team 2, team 3, or whatever, and bring that back in the classroom. So it's really nice to have a system like this, because after 4 to 6 weeks when you make new teams, you can go back to your cards and you'll know who was on the team, because believe me, you'll forget. When you sit down to make new teams, if you don't keep a record of it somewhere, you will completely forget what teams they were on. So anyways, those are some ideas, and I have it like fully explained in detail on the team formation page. I don't know whether Peggy or Francie has put the link in the chat area, but there's a whole page on my website that kind of explains team formation. Here's some seating options for you to consider with cooperative learning. Remember that as you start using more cooperative learning, you are not going to be just the teacher at the front of the room that's kind of dispensing information. You're going to be more of a facilitator of instruction. So it's good to have some kind of an arrangement where the kids are in clusters and you can easily move around them, rather than having them in rows, or even I've seen like a large U-shaped formation, which is fine for them seeing the front of the room, but when it comes time for them to work with teammates, that may be a little bit difficult. But this is a free download on my website, but I know it's hard to see, so I kind of like did a little screen capture of each part. This was by far my best arrangement. I did teams of 4. I did usually have 7 teams, because I usually had, you know, somewhere like 26 or 28 kids. But the 2 kids at the back, as you can see, they're facing forward, and the 2 kids on the side are kind of facing each other. But I like this arrangement because nobody's back was to me, and I felt like most of the kids could see the front of the room pretty easily. 2 more arrangements. A lot of people use the face-to-face desks, but like I said, they are kind of facing each other. That one didn't really work as well for me, but I know it works for a lot of people. If you have those L-shaped desks, you can do this star arrangement, but I'll tell you, it takes up a lot of room in your classroom. So if you have a large number of students in a small classroom, you might have some trouble with that one. If you have the L-shaped desks, you can also do this arrangement, the face-to-face. The thing that's a little bit hard is the people on the inside. You've got to leave like a little gap there because they can't get in and out of their desks. So this one takes up less room, but it does, you know, has that problem. If you have big long lab tables in your room and you're seating 8 kids to a lab table, you can kind of think of the 4 on one end as a team and the 4 on the other end as a team. And then the last arrangement is, if you haven't done much cooperative learning and you're really kind of uncomfortable about having the kids be anything other than totally facing the front of the room, you can put them in forward-facing rows and kind of cluster them. And then when you do a cooperative learning activity, the 2 at the front just physically turn their chairs around, and they use the tops of the desks of the people behind them as the workspace to do their assignments, and then when the cooperative learning activity is over, they can flip back around. So that is a nice arrangement. One thing I do like about having the tea tables or the things where they're close together is I always like to put a team tub right in the middle of the team. It was just like a plastic tub that I buy at Walmart for $1 or whatever. And it was a great place to keep team materials. One thing I did discover was it's good to number each team tub and every single thing that goes in it. So if it's rulers, if it's glue, if it's crayons, even the calculators would have the team number on them. And every day we had a team captain on each team. We just rotated the roles around, so like person number 1 was on Monday, person number 2 was on Tuesday, and so on. And one of the team captain's jobs was to make sure that everything was back in the tub at the end of the day. So there's 4 rulers, there's 4 calculators, they all have the right numbers and everything. So if you can kind of get that set up, it will make your life a lot easier when you go to do an activity. So it's your turn. I've done a lot of talking. In the chat, if you would say what seating arrangement would probably work best for your classroom and why. And a lot of people do like the tea table. Francie and I were talking, I shared this webinar with Francie and Peggy a couple of days ago because we always do a run through, and I love sharing the webinars with Francie and Peggy ahead of time because they always give me really good input and they ask good questions. And Francie was saying that she has a very large class this year, so she has her kids in teams of 6. And we were kind of talking about the difficulties of having 6 kids at a table as far as social skills. Sometimes it's hard for 6 kids to get along. There's so many together. But if you need to have teams of 6 when you do activities, you can break them down into 3 sets of partners. Or if it's kind of more of a team thing, you could have like at each end of the group, you could have 3 kids doing something and 3 other kids doing something. So if you have to have a team of 6, you do what you have to do with your space arrangement. Okay. All right. I did mention this in the first session. I want to bring it up again. You've got to have a good quiet signal, something that you're not going to mind using over and over and over again. I like to have some chimes. They're not obnoxious sounding, and they get the kids' attention. Teach it to your kids, and then make sure you're using it. I was very guilty of hitting the chimes, and then I didn't even really wait for the kids to get quiet, and I would just start right in with my instructions, and then I would kind of have to stop myself because I didn't wait for the kids to get quiet and respond to that. And Whole Brain Teaching has a great quiet signal that they use, and I think the best thing to do is go over and watch their videos, the class sort of callbacks. It's a really neat quiet signal. And then there's apps now. There's the Too Noisy app that has a little pointer that swings over and some different things. So if you want to share your favorite clapping patterns are always good because it doesn't matter where you are in the room. You can clap, or raising your hand is one that I used a lot, but if you raise your hand, if the kids are engaged in some noisy activities, they might not even hear you. So just be aware that you might need to do like a countdown. Like sometimes I would raise my hand and I would say 1, 2, 3, and then that way the kids were getting something audible too. Okay. Here's another management strategy that I developed. Years ago. I probably had this on my website 10 years ago. This is something I came up with for my classroom because I noticed that I was having some teams that were really off task, and I didn't want to, get on the whole class for misbehaving because it wasn't the whole class. It wasn't even just an individual. It was like a whole team was just getting kind of rowdy. So I came up with these little stop signs, and I cut them out, and I would just keep a couple of them in my hand. And when we were doing a cooperative learning activity, I would walk around, and when team got too noisy, I would just put this in the middle of the team and say, all right, you guys need to be quiet and think for 1 minute about how you could work more effectively. And the first time I did it, I was kind of, it's 5th grade, so I was like, oh, I don't know about these 5th graders. They're probably going to think this is sort of lame, but I want to try it. So I tried it, and I was so surprised because they hated being quiet for 1 minute. It was like the worst punishment ever. And I mean, I really thought it was funny how upset they got about having to do this. And then after I did it once or twice, all I had to do was pick up those stop signs in my hands, and they would go, shh, 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 she's coming around with stop signs. It was just amazing, for the age that the kids were. So anyways, I definitely want to share that and pass that along to you as a management. It's really all about the management when you have kids working together, and that's part of taking the chaos out of cooperative learning, is having good management systems. All right, so classroom management for teams is behind us, and we're going to move on to some actual teaching strategies. These are some teaching strategies that I think you'll be able to use for a variety of purposes. The first thing is an activity that I call Team Talk. And with Team Talk, it's really good to have some kind of question task cards. Task cards seem to keep kids focused on the discussion question or the prompt. And it's kind of funny, all of the task cards that I see on Pinterest and Teachers Pay Teachers now, because 15 years ago when I started my website and when I was really getting into cooperative learning, I did use task cards. They weren't so cute. They were just plain little task cards with questions on them, but I did call them task cards, and I've always found that they really help teams stay focused. So let me tell you a little bit about this activity. With this activity, you give one sheet to each team, or maybe ahead of time you cut them out. You have the kids cut them out. You put them face down in the middle of the team, and I have my students number off. I don't let them number off. I just say, if I'm standing in front of your team, clockwise around the team, I just kind of point to the kids, 1, 2, 3, 4. So they always know who student number 1 is, who student number 2 is, and so on. Student number 1 flips over the top card, they read it aloud, and they give a little bit of think time. So let's say they flip over the card, what do you like to do in your free time? Why do you like this activity? So to give everybody a minute to think. And then starting with the person who read out the question, they each go around the team clockwise and they respond. And this is a team builder activity. It's not supposed to be academic. It's just to get them comfortable with each other. So I tell them it is not a race to get through these cards. You're just trying to get to know each other. So if one team only talked about 2 cards the whole time, but they really got into some great discussions, that would be fine. If another team got through all of them, that would be fine too. So they're going to repeat the steps 1 through 3, and then they're going to rotate the role of leader. So the next time, student number 2 would flip over that top card, read it aloud, give everybody think time, and so on. And I would, especially at the beginning of the school year, I would let this go on for 5 or 10 minutes to have them time to get comfortable with each other. And so this is a free, I saw in here, is this available on the website? This is a free download, and I think Francie, it's on the Caring Classrooms page. Francie just put in the link of where you can get those. And you can, you could make them up on index cards or whatever, but they're pretty easy to make up and just give out to the kids to cut apart. But I will have to say, as an upper elementary teacher, especially a lot of years in 5th grade and some in 6th, I was a little resistant to these types of activities at first. I was very content focused, and I just thought, I don't have time for this, let's just get into the content. I'll do an activity like this, but I'll do it with reading or whatever. But I found out that if you try to get kids to do cooperative learning activities and you don't give them this time to get to know each other, they really have a hard time cooperating. They don't respect each other very well. Very sensitive to any kind of slight or body language and so on. But if you give kids time to talk and laugh together and get to know each other, they're much more tolerant when they get into academic activities. So this is a great first day or first week activity. All right, but let's talk about how you could use this same activity in an academic sense. This is another free thing on my website. How many of you guys know Just a Dream by Chris Van Allsburg? How many people know the book? I'm going to clear, in fact, you can use your checks and your X's over there on the left side. How many people know this book? This is an awesome book. It's great for Earth Week or whatever, but really it's great any time of the year, about a little boy who kind of has a vision for what the future is going to be like, but he's trashing his environment and so on. He has a dream about what it's going to be like in the future, and then he wakes up and he realizes he needs to change things. Anyways, I love this book so much that I put together this, it's probably like a 10-page packet of free activities and things that go along with it. And one of the things that's in that packet is these discussion cards. So how would you do this a little bit different when you're talking about a book or you're doing it academically? What you would do is you still stack the cards face down. Student 1 flips over the top card and reads it aloud and gives think time. But this time, because a lot of times there's really like one right answer, like the comprehension answer that's correct or whatever, you're not going to have everybody respond. So this time student 1 calls it out, student 2 gets to respond, but then student 3 can add a detail. Maybe they could disagree, share a different answer, or maybe they could pass and say, you know, I don't have anything else to add. But it's like you go around the whole team and everybody gets a chance to either respond in some way or pass. And then you repeat the steps 1 through 3 again, you know, with the next leader. So each time you do it, you're rotating the role of leader. So this is a great one for science review questions, social studies questions. How about if I stop talking for a minute and let you guys put some ideas in the chat area about what could you use team talk for? Like what kinds of questions? Like personally, I don't think the kinds of task cards that have multiple choice questions would be all that great for this. I think we're looking for questions that are either kind of open-ended or require kids to give a little more in-depth answer. I see math problem solving, and I'm going to tell you I would not use this for math problem solving, and I'm going to share why in a little while. There's another structure. There's 2 more structures I'm going to share with you, Showdown and Recharge and Write, that you could use for math problems. The reason this one's not that great for math problems is because it kind of needs to be like a quick discussion type thing, and if they have to sit there and work out a problem, there's going to be a lot of time where kids are just waiting for somebody to figure out an answer. So this is not a real good structure for math problems. Now if you want to do something like questions like how do we use math in everyday life, or you have some other types of you know, or even some things like what are the, well, even if you say like what are the factors of 12, like somebody's got to sit there and figure it out. So these are a little bit better for reading, social studies, science, character ed type questions, and so on. So that's team talk. Okay, now let me share with you why I have this slide up here. What I just shared with you back here with team talk, I don't think we could really say that's a discussion, right? The kids are flipping over a card, each kid goes around in a circle, they answer. I mean, it's great. We want kids doing that in cooperative learning teams, but is that how you have a discussion with your friends when you go out to dinner? Does everybody flip over a card and go around the table and say their answer? No, that's not what a real discussion is like. So that's why I have this question for you. What makes a great team discussion or group discussion or friend discussion when you're hanging out with your friends and you're saying, we had this really great discussion about so-and-so. What made it great? I want to just let you put in the chat. Everyone has a chance to speak while everyone else listens. Thoughts are validated, allows for safe ways to disagree. I'm just reading from the chat here. Speaking and listening, bouncing off ideas, people give their opinions, everyone's involved, listening, respecting, eye contact, great. So the question is, if we rely too much on real structured discussion strategies like team talk, we're not really going to get the kids to where they need to be when it comes to having real discussions. So let's take a look at the Common Core. This part of the Common Core is not as well known. We have a lot of focus on reading and math, but there are speaking and listening standards that I was very excited to see when they came out, because this hasn't really been in the standards before. So let's see what the Common Core says. And I pulled all the way back to grade 1 because I wanted all of you, if you're not aware of this, all of us to realize all the way down to grade, kindergarten has some standards, but they're not, grade 1 is where there's some expectations here that I'll be addressing. But it says all the way back to grade 1 and all the way up through K, through 12, participate in collaborative conversations with diverse partners about grade 1 topics and texts with peers and adults in small and larger groups. And then it's 1.1a, follow agreed upon rules for discussion, listening to others with care, speaking one at a time about the topics and texts under discussion. So that's pretty neat, but look at this standard. This is pretty amazing that this is down in grade 1. It says, build on others' talk and conversations by responding to the comments of others through multiple exchanges. When I read this, I just kept thinking and thinking and thinking. I was like, I don't think anybody ever taught me how to teach kids to do that. How do you teach kids to build on others' talk and conversations? So I started talking about it. I had some ideas. I ran some ideas by Pat Calfee, who teaches workshops with me. We kind of threw some things together, and then it kind of pulled together into a series of lessons that I ended up calling discussion connections. So let me share with you some strategies that you can use when you're trying to teach kids how to introduce or how to connect their ideas to other people's ideas in the group. So this thing is best done in a whole group setting. This is just too challenging to do in cooperative learning teams, even with the older kids, because they're not used to doing it. So the first thing you do is read a short story or chapter in a book or informational text article, and then you pose a question that there's going to be a lot of different views to, because you want kids to be able to agree and disagree. Then, and I'm going to show you on the next slide, you teach kids how to connect their ideas in a class discussion. And then the last thing that you would do in this whole group activity is have kids actually come forward to the front of the class when they respond and link arms to show connections. Now for older kids, if they aren't going to want to link arms, maybe you could do some paper chain links or do something, maybe you guys can throw some ideas in the chat about how, or maybe just standing next to each other. But the linking part is I think really key. So how do you connect ideas in a discussion? Well, if you think about what you do with your own friends, if there's a group of people, you'll usually state the person's name first who has the idea that you want to connect to. And then you're going to mention a key idea or fact or an opinion or something that the other person shared, and then you'll kind of come in with your own idea or opinion. So I came up with some, and you see this little picture down here in the corner of discussion questions. This all went together. This is not a free item. This is a product for sale, discussion questions. But I'm sharing a lot of information. You could do a lot of this on your own and certainly don't have to purchase it. But in the Discussion Connections mini pack, I put together some discussion prompts to help kids. So I might say, like, Julie, what you said about the giant being friendly made me think of, and then I kind of share my idea. Or John, I'm confused about what you meant by blank. Would you explain in more detail or give an example? Or Sally, I can see why you would think so-and-so, but I had another view, I think. So if you go back, I'm going to just click back. So the three parts would be name the person who shared the idea, then you mention a key idea, fact, or opinion, and then you go in and state your own question, opinion, or idea. So I put together some discussion starter cards. They're in black and white and color that you can cut out and the kids can have in the middle of the team, and they can just like have them spread out on the table where they could reach out in the middle and grab one when they're wanting to use it for a discussion. Okay, another activity that would be kind of an extension beyond that would be, instead of having the kids get up at the front and link arms, that can be a little bit artificial because it's just implying that there's one way of connecting. But if you think about a real conversation, there's multiple ways of connecting. So if you think about Jack and the Beanstalk, and you have a question like, was Jack foolish or clever? You pose a question. You give each student a little paper strip and they put their name on it, and then during the discussion they come forward to the front of the class and they add their link to one of the chains. So Sally might respond first, and then maybe Brad links onto Sally's idea. Or maybe Brad wants to introduce a new line of thinking, and so you hang a new one on. And so there's like multiple ways, but it's still a whole group activity because the kids are going to need like a lot of modeling about how to link their ideas. Now, these would be appropriate for primary and elementary. The next one, I don't know that you would want to do it anything below 4th grade and up. It's pretty challenging. Pat tested it out in a workshop with teachers, and it was quite challenging. But you have a piece of poster paper in the middle of the team, and you put a circle, you put the question, everybody has Post-its, and then when you start talking, you stick your Post-it down on the poster paper, and you put maybe a key word that answers the question, not the whole sentence. Then you actually draw lines connecting, who you connected your idea to and that kind of thing. So it becomes like this big discussion web. So these are 3 strategies that you can use to get kids to learn to link their ideas to other kids. And I guarantee you that if you do some of these activities at the beginning of the year, later they will start using these strategies in their own discussions in literature circles and things like that without you even having to prompt them to do this. It's just that kids don't really know and they haven't really had any modeling on this. Okay. Whole new strategy for teams. So maybe I should just stop for just a second, and if anybody wants to put anything in the chat before I go into team sorting about the whole discussion connections. If you have questions and so on, Francie and Peggy will grab them and then they can be answered at the end. Okay. All right, so if you remember from the first session, we did buddy sorting. And team sorting is exactly the same thing. It's just that you have teams of 4 and they're going around in the team. You have a graphic organizer of some sort, could be a T-chart, a Venn diagram, or whatever. You have some task cards that have pictures or shapes, words, or numbers. You stack them down and it says near the GO, graphic organizer. This is step number 4 is really important. Team members take turns flipping over the top card, reading it aloud, and placing it on the chart. If you can imagine, if you just gave the kids, let me show you, this is a picture of my students doing this. It's hard for you to see, but they drew a Venn diagram on a dry erase board, and it was in the middle of the team. And she's got some task cards right there in front of her. But if you can imagine, if you just gave the directions, okay, sort these cards out where they go on the Venn diagram, and you did not have the kids take turns, you know what would happen. The kid that was the bossiest kid would just grab the cards and just start throwing them down there. Nobody's paying attention to where anything's going. Or they would say, hey, let's just do this quickly. We'll divide them up. And they would just like pass all the cards out, and everybody would throw them on the graphic organizer. Then they would raise their hands. You come over to check. Half of them are wrong. And you know what they're going to say? That wasn't my card. That was her card. So that's not cooperative learning. That's group work. So to make it more structured and more meaningful, have the cards stacked, and one student flips over the top card, reads it out loud, and says, you know, I think this goes in the middle because it has both qualities or whatever, and everybody can give a thumbs up or a verbal agreement, and then the person puts it down. If somebody doesn't agree and says, no, I think it should go so and so, they talk about it, and then it gets put down. And that way there's far fewer opportunities for there to be mistakes. A lot of conversations. It really digs deep into whatever the concept is that's being explored, and it's just way, you see all the kids are leaning in. They are all involved in the activity, and they're listening and they're participating. So one example would be an activity with polygons, and I put this together in a mini pack. This is not free, but this is a product called Polygon Explorations, and it has pages and pages of different shapes that you can cut out and use for this activity. The shapes actually have numbers on them, which is really helpful when you're going over the answers. But if you could imagine the shapes stacked up, and one student flips one over and they have to name it, like this is a trapezoid, and it goes on the quadrilateral side because it doesn't have any right angles, and so they place it down. And then the next person flips one over. This is a right triangle. It goes on the right angle side. It does not go in the middle because it's not a quadrilateral. You know, they have to justify the reasons for what they're doing. So it's just a team sorting. That's only one activity. There's some games and center games and things in the Polygon Explorations pack. And I will tell you a quick story. I used these activities with my students the last year that I taught. We were doing it as a review right before the end of grade test. I had no idea what was on the end of grade test, but we spent about an hour with these activities in Polygon Explorations, all these different sorting activities and things. And so they were getting so good with their terminology, with their reasoning, with their thinking. And then the next day, there was so much geometry all over. I mean, my kids just blew it out on the geometry part of that test. And I knew it was spending an hour like digging into doing these cooperative learning activities right before the test. It was really helpful. So I have a question for you. We talked about buddy sorting last time, and then we talked about team sorting. So when you're teaching and when you're designing your lesson, you have to think about, would I do this as a buddy sorting activity, or would I do it as a team sorting activity? That's your choice. That's your call. So what factors might impact your choice in this activity? I'm going to give you a minute to type your ideas into the chat. I see level of rigor. That is very true. The harder something is, the more likely you would want to do it with a whole team because it takes a lot of input. If it's easy, then buddies are good. I see how good they are working in large groups. That's true too. If the kids can't get along in big groups, that's not going to work. The type of response required, right? If we're mostly sorting, it's a similar response to team. How about materials? Do I see anybody say the amount of materials you have? If you have 7 teams and you only have 7 sets of polygons, obviously you're going to have to do this as a team activity. It might be the space too. It may take a lot of space for the kids to be sorting activities and so on. Somebody put how the day is going. That's true. It is going to be more challenging for kids to work in teams. So I guess I'm trying to convey the idea that you are the person in charge in your room, and when you kind of understand that there are these choices to be made, it can help you a lot to think about why you would choose one option over another. Okay, I want to share with you a structure called Showdown. Now, I bet you a lot of you already know Showdown. If you've already heard of Showdown, would you click the green check mark? And if you've never heard of Showdown, and I'm not really talking about the type of Showdown that I shared in the first one, because that was like a whole group. This is like a team thing. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting little story. I'll give you a little bit of background on this. Showdown is a Kagan structure, and I said I wasn't really going to be sharing Kagan things, but The reason I'm sharing this one is because I invented it. When I was writing the book Discovering Decimals for Kagan, I was using these activities in the classroom, and I was doing this activity with my students. And part of writing the books for Kagan means you have to break it down into structures. So I was doing this activity with my students, and I could not match it to a structure in the book. So I actually called Spencer Kagan and said, I need help. I need to know what structure this is. And when I talked to him, he said, it's not any of the structures. It's a new structure. And so he actually came up with a name for it, which I thought was a great name. But anyways, that's why I guess I feel comfortable kind of sharing this one. But Showdown is a wonderful structure to use with task cards again. It really keeps the kids focused. You stack task cards in the center of the team, usually face down as long as the answers aren't on the back of the cards. The leader reads the first problem aloud, and then without talking, everybody, including the leader, writes the answer on his or her own dry erase board. So you do need individual chalkboards or dry erase boards for this. And then all the kids put their dry erase boards face down when they're finished. Now, if they really don't have any idea what to do, I let my kids put a question mark the first few times. But if I saw that happening much, then I would go over and provide some help. Then after all the cards are dry erase boards are face down, the leader says Showdown, and everybody flips over their dry erase boards and they show their answers. They check and discuss the differences, and sometimes you might have the kids write the answer on the back of the card if you're going to come check, or they might check with an answer key or QR codes or something if you have that. And then you keep rotating the leaders clockwise for each round. It's a real engaging, fun activity. It seems like a game, but there's no points. It really is not really good to be scoring points. They're just having a good time reviewing and learning. This is a free activity from my website. It's Round and Compare, and it does have decimals. So if your students don't do decimals, you could easily make up something similar with whole numbers. So you cut the cards up, put them face down in the middle of the team. One kid flips the top card, and I say round to the nearest tenth. Everybody does the work on their own dry erase board, put it face down. Leader says Showdown, flip it over, and then they check answers. And if anybody has something different, then you explain to, somebody on the team explains how they got their answer. So it's a great strategy. Now, this is another free one on my website, Quotation Mark Showdown. Kids have so much trouble knowing when to use quotation marks. This is kind of like a two-parter thing. When they flip over the card and show it to the team and read it, they first have to decide if it's an indirect quote, and then it doesn't need quotation marks, or if it's a direct quote. Once they decide if it's a direct quote, then they all have to copy it on their boards and then put the quotation marks in properly, and then they do their showdown. So it's sort of like a two-part showdown on this one. And these are two actual products for sale. Possessive Noun Showdown, which actually goes all the way down to 3rd grade. And then if you're teaching states and capitals, Find the State Showdown is a fun way for the kids to review. I do want to give you a few management tips. Be sure to use task cards and not like worksheets or pages out of the book. The task cards keep the kids focused. What happens if you don't use task cards is that kids try to rush ahead and go down the whole worksheet, and they try to just do all the problems ahead, and they're not really paying attention. The task cards keep the kids focused on one problem at a time. Also, you should probably reseat your kids for Showdown if they have a lot of different levels, because they will get frustrated even in 5th grade. Like, I kind of learned this the hard way. There was tears popping up, and I was run over like, what's going on over here? And one of the kids would be sort of tearing up. In 5th grade they weren't bawling, but you could tell they were upset. And they were saying, the team's being mean to me. And the kids on the team were saying, no, we're just trying to help. But what it is, if you're the kid that's getting one wrong every single time over and over and over, it's overwhelming and the team's trying to help, but you feel like you're not getting it. It's very frustrating. So I would say you could reseat your kids in more ability similar groups and even give them different task cards. Like if it's division, have different levels. You could also put kids together at like a guided math group or guided language arts group or whatever with an adult. And then, you know, once you pull the lowest ones out, the average and high kids are usually fine on their own. It's just a good way to, it's a good thing to be aware of. The other thing is, this is a good structure for quick skill review and practice. It is not a good structure for like multi-step word problems because kids are waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. So I'm going to share with you another one that's better for that, and that's the whole thing about cooperative learning and why I really recommend that you get training from Kagan if this interests you, because they do several days of training and it's so important to experience it firsthand, how these different, how different activities work and how to make the decisions about what to teach. So, whoops, I think I missed, what did I miss here? Oh no, I did. Okay. So here's another one. This isn't even on my website anywhere. So I just put together this cute little set of directions just for you guys, and it is on the page where the webinar certificate is, and I also gave Francie and Peggy a direct link to the PDF version of this thing. But this is a great strategy for those higher level types of questions and problems. So let me tell you how it works, since I know you can't read it from far away. These are really sloppy directions, but I had to try to kind of condense them. But with recharge and write, the idea is that you're going to have a cup in the middle of the team that's going to be the recharger. And kids are going to be putting their pencils in that cup during part of the activity. So the first thing you do is you give everybody a copy of the worksheet or the assignment. It's not a thing where there's one per team. Everybody gets it. They all put their pencils in the team cup, which is, we call it the recharger. The leader reads the first question, and then everybody discusses what they think the answer is. Nobody's writing anything. Then when the leader says, all right, is everybody ready, everyone picks up their own pencil and they write their answer, and they cannot talk. So they can't say, oh, what was that? What's the answer again? Tell me what I'm supposed to write. Like, everybody has to listen during the discussion. Now, I did find that sometimes they weren't listening that well and they were confused, and sometimes they would say, can we put our pencils back in the recharger and talk about this a little bit more, because I still don't get it. I still don't understand it. Then they would all put their pencils. But the main thing is it eliminates that whole thing of one kid just telling another kid, this is what you write. And then you're rotating around for each question. So let me give you an example. I have this daily math puzzler book. Some of you probably use them with your students. There's a whole way you can use them that's explained in the math puzzlers, but the cooperative learning strategy you can use them for, it would be recharge and write. So it would be kind of like this. It's a 4-part worksheet. Person number 1, everybody has the same worksheet. Person number 1 reads out loud the first problem. So all of the kids are talking about, they're not writing the answer yet. They're not writing anything on their paper, but they're talking about what would they do, like what are their strategies. Well, first I'm going to add this up, and then I'm going to subtract this, or I'm going to draw a picture of so-and-so. So they get to talk it through, but they can't write anything. And then when they take their pencils out of the cup, out of the recharger, and they start working on it, they can't talk anymore. They could use a calculator, but they can't talk. And then when everybody's done with number 1, they put their pencils back in the cup, and then person number 2 reads the next one. So it kind of goes on in that way. So this is an example of a note-taking activity on the rainforest. There was 4 questions. You could use recharge and write for that. So the questions were, what are rainforests like? Why are they important? Why are they being cut down? What problems are caused by deforestation? So they can do one flap at a time where they put their pencils in the cup and they talk about it, and then when they pick their pencils up, they do their writing and they're not allowed to talk. So it's kind of a yeah, Stacy says like think, pair, share, but with a whole group. It kind of is. It's structuring it. Okay, here's one when we were doing the stock market game. I actually had a rubric for this, and they would do the same thing, and I actually gave them, I guess it was your grade, you'll get a 0 to a 5 based on the completeness and accuracy of your response. And so I collected these and graded them when they were done. Okay. Let's just take a look at a traditional activity, and I do realize I'm kind of running out of time, but I think this is important, and I'm going to hang in here with it even though I'm running over the hour. And I'm just going to say, if you do have to leave, you can finish watching the recording later, but I just think it's important, and I don't want to just cut it off because an hour has gone by, so forgive me for going over a little bit. But if you think about the traditional Scoot activity, you put task cards on the kid's desk. Every student solves a problem and records an answer on a recording sheet. The teacher says Scoot, and then everybody gets up and they move to the next seat. They sit down, and there's a new card, and they solve that problem, and they write the answer down, and they just keep going around the team until they've done like all 24 problems or whatever. And they come back, and then you either have to collect the papers and grade them, or you go over them as a class. When I first heard about this, I first was like, oh wow, that's really neat. Kids are up, they're moving, I bet they would really like that. But then the more I thought about it, I started thinking, well, they are moving, but the way I've seen the directions before, they're not talking. They just get up and they move to the next seat. It's basically like a worksheet, but you just get up for every problem and go to the next seat. So there's really not the higher level thinking. There's not feedback. You still have to take the papers home, or you have to spend a half an hour of class time going over the answers. So after I thought through it, I thought, I think I could change this and turn it into a team Scoot. So I came up with some directions, and I had a teacher, Lori Tanner in California, who volunteered to test it out with their kids. And they really liked it, and there's a I don't even think I have the link here, but there's something on my blog where I shared these pictures, and she gave me feedback from her students. They thought it was great. But here's the difference. You still have task cards on the desk. The students solve the problem and record the answer. The teacher says Scoot. But what happens for this part is students move to the next seat on the team, not around the whole class. They solve the problem and record the new answer. Then they do this 4 more times, so they've solved 3 more times. So they continue around the team until they get back to their original seat. So they've only done 4 problems, and then they check and discuss the answers as a team. So they each say, well, here's what I got for number 1, here's what I got for number 2, or whatever. So this is a free packet on my website that has some recording pages and things in it. But her kids really like this a lot better because they got to talk over, they did the scooting 4 times, which is when they were quiet, but then every 4 times they got to stop and talk with their team about the problems that they had done. And then, of course, the teacher doesn't have any papers to take home at the end of the day. And you don't really grade these either because this is cooperative learning, and you don't really want to be grading something like this, maybe other than participation. So anyways, that's a free packet. All right, so before we go to the last part of the session, were any of these strategies new to you, and which ones do you plan to use? So we did team talk, and we did the discussion connections ideas, we did team sorting, Showdown, we did recharge and write, and we did team Scoot. Great. Okay. All right. So let's this is kind of our last piece here, but as I said, I think it's pretty important, so I'm going to keep rolling here. We already talked a little bit about choosing the right team size, whether it's partners or teams. Anytime you're doing cooperative learning, you have a decision to make. Do you want to do this as partners or teams? So some things you might consider, as we talked about before, is the difficulty of the task, the availability of your materials. You always want to aim for the highest % of students engaged, but sometimes you're limited. So on Halloween, I always had parents donate pumpkins, and I could usually get 7 of them, 1 per team. That's all I could get, so that the measuring activities and things that we did, and I think these are in my October mini pack, those activities were done per team. But I had plenty of batteries and bulbs and wires and things, and so when we were exploring electricity, I let the kids work in partners because everybody wants to, put their hands on and get the bulb to light up. Nobody wants to sit and watch one person on the team do that. So there's always a decision to be made. Go for the highest % of students engaged if possible. The question of roles comes up a lot of times. Many people think when you have cooperative learning, that means you got to have roles. You got to have a recorder. You got to have a reader. You got to have a materials manager. And I'm here to tell you that's not true. I hardly ever used roles. I use them from time to time in some science activities. They did provide some accountability, and sometimes they prevented arguments, but the roles aren't usually equal. One role is usually a lot more fun and a lot better than the others, and that actually caused arguments. And it really resulted in less active engagement because one kid was getting to do all the fun stuff, and then one person was recording and one person was reading and so on. So, kind of get that out of your mind that you don't need to do roles in cooperative learning. Another thing to think about is to divide up the tasks without assigning formal role titles. So in 5th grade, when we did decimals, we got out our base 10 materials, and there's 4 things. There's the little unit cubes, there's the rods, there's the flats, there's the big cubes. So I divided it up. One kid got each thing. And when they had their placemats in the middle of the team, and I said, okay, build 23 and 1400s, everybody had to contribute their materials, and they could not touch anybody else's materials. So they were all involved, and nobody could just sit and do nothing. They all had to get involved. So you can sometimes divide up the tasks and handle it that way. Or you can have kids rotate so that maybe there is a fun role and everybody takes a turn, like when we're weighing objects on a pan balance, everybody gets to take a turn weighing something. I would never have one person gets to be the person that weighs everything. So it's just another way of thinking about roles. As far as grading goes, most activities you're not going to grade. Like if you're doing a team sorting activity, even if you got them to glue the shapes down, you wouldn't want to put a grade on that because you don't really know who understands it. You need to give a quiz later. So, it's practice. Cooperative learning is mostly for practice. The only exception to that would be if you're doing a project and you spent a week on it and you feel like, hey, I got to hold these kids accountable for what they're doing. I need a grade for this. So when that happened to me, I came up with a team project evaluation form, and I'm going to zoom in on it. What it was is, let's say you had a team of 4 working on something. They all got a copy of this form. Everyone in the team got their own copy. They put their project title, and it says, briefly describe your contribution to the project. What did you bring and or do? So did you bring props for the play? Did you write the script? What did you do? Each student writes what they contributed. And then they have to pass it around the table, and everybody has to sign off that they agree, yes, that's what you did. And you use that to help you come up with a grade for each person. There's also a reflective piece at the bottom. If you were to do this over, what would you do differently to improve your work? How could your team work together more effectively next time? I found that in 5th grade, including those kinds of questions made them a lot more reflective, and the next time they did better, and they wanted to be able to write some good things about how they worked well together. I guess the final piece here is looking at the difference between group work and cooperative learning. I've had so many people tell me, I don't like cooperative learning. I hated it when I was in school, and I don't want to make my kids have to go through what I went through. And so I'll ask them, okay, what was it like? Well, the teacher gave us a project and just said work together on a group. And they would say, I did all the work, everybody got an A, but I'm the only one that did the work. Well, I'm going to say that is not cooperative learning. That's group work. Put your heads together as a team, talk this over. That's kind of group work because some kids are going to do all the talking and there's not a lot of accountability. So group work has very few directions, no accountability, really loose structure, usually not equal participation. Usually there's no kind of social skill instruction. And when you grade something, everybody just gets the same grade. And I would call that chaotic. That leads to chaos in the classroom when you try to use group work. That cooperative learning has specific directions. Students are held accountable for their learning. It's tightly structured. There's equal participation. We teach social skills. And when we do grade things, the grade is based on your own contributions. But sometimes, despite everything you've done, cooperative learning is not working. Like, you get so fed up and you're like, I don't get it. Like, I think I'm doing everything right and it's just falling apart. So when I had a lesson like that, I kind of had to pull myself together, grab the lesson. I kept things in notebooks, and I would start writing notes on sticky notes and put it in there. I mean, I'm sure you could do it digitally too, but you need to make yourself some notes, like where did it fall apart? And I came up with a question sheet called Cooperative Learning SOS. And this is just a partial list of some of the things that are on that page. That's a free thing on my website. Like, do my students even care about each other as individuals? If they act like they don't even care about each other, then I need to do more team building. And the page that I shared with you has like what you do if these things are going on. Do they have the social skills they need? If not, you've got to teach the social skills. Go back to the first webinar. Do my students even want to do cooperative learning? Some kids would say, no, I don't want to do it. I just want to work by myself. So I would have to convince them of why they wanted to do it. You know, so there's like a whole list of 10 questions that can help you, guide you through, and then also check in with other people who are doing cooperative learning activities and tell them about the lesson and say, this thing fell apart, it just bombed and I don't know what happened. And a lot of times somebody else can help you kind of pinpoint. Maybe you did teams and you should have done it in partners and there was too many kids just waiting around. So, as a little wrap up on cooperative learning, I guess the way I think about cooperative learning is engaging kids in structured cooperative learning activities provides them with a safe environment where they can develop those social skills and they can develop confidence. But that's not everything about school. Like, cooperative learning is awesome, it's wonderful, the structural approach is wonderful. But ultimately, we want to be able to loosen up all that structure, give them more freedom to make choices about how and what they learn. And there are so many neat things you can do with kids. Like, after you kind of acclimate them and teach them these strategies and teach them how to get along at the first of the year, then you can start opening things up. And you know, during center time there's much more freedom, and there's just opportunities for them to get involved in passion projects and so on. How many people are familiar with Angela, and I can't remember if it's Mayer or Myers site, and she has some awesome material. She has a book called A Passion-Driven Classroom. And this is a wonderful book about getting kids to figure out what is their passion rather than just learning what the teacher says to learn, and part of each week spending time on a passion project. And I've seen some things, and Jennifer Rundy on my blog last year wrote a great article about passion projects and so on. So I guess I kind of see the structured approach to cooperative learning as kind of getting some of those pieces in place so that kids can move on and go into some of these higher levels. Angela has a great article on 26 keys to student engagement. They go by the letters of the alphabet, but there's just a few that I thought were important. She talks about things being collaborative, that collaboration is so important in student engagement. She introduces a term about it being generative. Learning is not something you absorb, it's something you create for yourself, mentally or physically. And that usually involves working with other people, linking ideas, co-creating, and so on. And that's participatory. You are encouraging participation, and it fosters an engaged student body. It's hands-on, minds-on, eyes-on, and it really involves kids at all levels. And that brings me back to a slide that I shared last time. When you have hands-on instruction and minds-on instruction, you have hearts-on instruction, and kids learn to love learning. They experience the joy of learning, and really that's what it's all about. So the cooperative learning strategies I've shared today are kind of some nuts and bolts, basics, and practical strategies that will hopefully allow you to take your kids even farther beyond. So I have some more resources on my website. If you click the strategies link, there's lots of stuff about mastery learning, cooperative learning, and so on there. And I was about to tell you how to get the certificate in just a moment. And I did want to mention that it just so happens, I did not plan it this way, but there's a big sale on Teachers Pay Teachers, and right now all of my resources are 28% off. That is through the end of the day, midnight Eastern time, which is only 9 o'clock for those of you in California. And this time I'm actually I'm involved with the Caring Classroom community on Donors Choose, and I have pledged to give back 10% of anything I earn during the sale to the Caring Classrooms community on Donors Choose to help fund teacher projects. So I just wanted to let you know about that. Also, there's going to be a survey that pops up when you exit. Don't answer that because that has to do with Classroom 2.0 Live. So, Peggy, I've talked and talked and talked for an hour and 15 minutes. Can you tell us a little bit about Classroom 2.0 Live?
This will be really fast. Classroom 2.0 Live is a weekly webinar that we do every Saturday to share great teaching strategies and tools for teachers that want to learn to incorporate more technology in their classrooms. Tomorrow's, or this week's show is going to be about 81 Dash with the developer and creator of the tool, and it's a back channel tool. You will love it if you haven't heard of it yet. So come and check us out, and we'll record everything so you can go in our archives and listen to recordings too.
Great, and I see that you put the link already in the chat, and you can put it in there again when as I'm talking about the next part for those who missed it while it was flying by. Thanks so much for letting us use the webinar room too. Okay, so just quickly, all the cute little artwork came from these wonderful artists. One of them is my daughter, Wendy, Digital Classroom Clip Art. In fact, just today she was drawing up for me that little cup with pencils in it for recharge and write. It's wonderful to have an artist right here in house. Okay, here's how to get your attendance certificate. Now, I want to go through this really slowly and carefully because last time I had a lot of people emailing me saying they couldn't get it, and it comes down to typing it in carefully. You cannot click on this screen anywhere. Francie and Peggy are putting it, we'll be putting it in the chat in just a minute. Your best thing to do is just go over there and click on it in the chat. But it's lauracandler.com. All of this is lowercase, /webinars, has to have an S, /AE webinar TWO.php. Or if you do the bit.ly, it's bit.ly/AE webinar 2, the number 2. That you'll be able to download the certificate. You should be able to, when you bring it up as a PDF, there's like a blue box and you can usually type in it and type your name. It's not like a real cute font or anything, but if you want it typed, you can do that. If it won't work, just print it out. It won't have the blue box, and just handwrite your name in it. So let's let people try clicking on the link that's in the chat and make sure. I mean, I tested it out earlier today and it should be working just fine. So I do apologize for going over, but it just, the information, like I said, I figured that you can quit and come back later if you have to get back to work. I know some of you have school tomorrow, so I really appreciate it. We are going to do the question and answer time. So for those who have time to hang around, I think Peggy will start sharing with me what some of the questions are, and I'm going to click over. There's a tab where we kind of share that. Trying to get to it right now, but for some reason it's not letting me.
I'll jump right on, Laura.
I don't know why, but something is like popping up every time I click and I cannot get to that tab.
Well, it's
weird.
Just rebelling.
Okay, so
don't worry. There were not a lot of questions. There were a few, and people in the chat were fabulous, and many of them actually answered the questions that came up. So there was a lot of discussion about whiteboards and cleaning them, and they were recommending using Pledge to make them last longer and work better. One person wondered about the use of whiteboards, and what do you do if you only have one whiteboard? And that's where you and others were talking about getting the shower board and cutting it down and making individual boards. So unless you'd like to add anything to that conversation?
Well, what I would say is all of that was really gone into in the first part. So I would say go back and watch session 1, because that's where I had talked about all of that. And one thing that was shared, and I don't think I brought it up in session 1, but several people have told me, and I think it's true, like I've been using like Clorox baby wipes to clean those shower board things, and they clean it off really good, but I think it ruins the finish. And I saw some people putting that in the chat, and that kind of explains what has happened to some of my dry erase boards lately. So I see that some people have said Pledge spray. Maybe that does not ruin the finish. I don't know. Some people say just buy whiteboard cleaner and use that, but the shower boards are the cheap way to go. Just go to Lowe's and get shower boards and get them cut in like 12-inch squares. It's definitely the, and then go to, if you're a public school teacher in the United States, go to Donors Choose, go to Quill, I think is where you shop there, and there's lots of places that have dry erase board sets, and write yourself up a Donors Choose proposal for dry erase boards for your classroom. It's like a great investment.
Great suggestion.
All right.
There's lots of conversation about Scoot, and it actually started before you got to the slide where you really explained it in detail. So I really think you answered all of those questions already. Susan asked about ESE students who are very low functioning.
Right.
She's required to teach the regular math curriculum. Do you have suggestions for her?
Well, I mean, that's just a whole big, huge question. Anyways, when you've got struggling students, I mean, I would say when you're doing some of the activities like Showdown, you've got to put them in groups. You know, pull the kids that are really going to struggle and try to get them some help, whether you as a teacher go work with that lowest group and then the other kids are okay on their own. But you can't, for some things, you can't just leave them mixed in. I don't really approve of cooperative learning to where, you know, the 5 smartest kids in your class spend their whole day teaching everybody else. That's really not what cooperative learning is. You know, they need to be having challenges on their own and having differentiated instruction too. So I would say a lot of partner activities are good for kids that are low functioning. Teams are much harder for kids to function well in teams. They get their feelings hurt easily. You know, I would say stick to a lot of partner activities probably.
Oh, those are great suggestions. You do such an amazing job thinking on your feet. I'm just so in awe.
Well, that's just because of all those, if I hadn't taught for 30 years, I wouldn't. I see a question here about exit tickets. And somebody
quite a few comments about that.
I didn't really use them per se, but from what I've seen, it's like where you might have a question and at the end of the lesson, and you have kids answer a question and then maybe on a post-it note, and they pop it on a board or something in the room or the door with their name, and then you as a teacher grab them and you look over their answers to see if they, you know, learn the concept or whatever. Oh, I mean, I think those are great. That, I don't see, like somebody said, pros and cons. I don't see any cons at all. I mean, that's, when you do cooperative learning, you need to follow up with something for accountability to see who got it and who didn't get it. So if you give them 2 problems and they have to complete those problems on their exit ticket or whatever, I think that's a great strategy. So one thing I didn't really bring out in this session that I said in the first session is cooperative learning is wonderful, but you can't do cooperative learning all day, every day, because testing is not like that, real life is not like that, and I actually went overboard with cooperative learning my first year and did too much of it, and the kids were looking around for their buddies when testing time came around. They didn't know how to think for themselves. So you know, I think cooperative learning needs to be balanced with individual work. So exit tickets I think are great. let's see.
I think that's most of the questions,
if somebody has another question that hasn't been answered, type it again in the chat, and then I'll look to see.
Laura, there was a little bit of conversation about, while you were explaining math, I believe it was in the Showdowns, they wondered about what that might look like for English language arts.
Okay.
And several people shared some examples.
Okay.
Maybe you can do that also.
I didn't see what examples were shared, but you could, for like, well, the possessive noun thing, I didn't show what the inside of that pack looks like, but it has sentences, and then it would have like an underlined space where you're going to have either the plural or the possessive form of the noun, and then it actually gives the kids two choices. So somebody would read out loud the sentence and then show the two options, and then everybody would put whether it's plural or possessive and do the showdown and show it. You can also do things like have question cards that have a word underlined, and then the kids have to tell what part of speech it is. You know, is it a noun, is it a verb, or is it the subject, is it the predicate? You know, Showdown is just good for like quick review of those types. It wouldn't be for writing. I mean, it's more of a, like, good for grammar type skills. You know, punctuation, you know, here's a sentence and what are all the common nouns in here? What are all the proper nouns? And then they write them on their boards. So there's so many ideas for, like, Showdown. There's just, I could talk for an hour about Showdown. Like, there's so many ideas for Showdown. It's just such a very, but it is you know, low-level skill review. But hey, you know, you need some low-level skill review in school for kids to get fluent with some of those concepts. But you don't want to spend your whole day doing Showdown things. You want to get them to higher levels.
Right.
Like the recharge and write strategy is much more challenging, and you know, takes kids really, they dig into their discussion and their writing and that kind of thing.
And there were a couple of questions about the lower grade levels, like grade 1. Would you be using Showdown in grade 1?
See, this is where it's wonderful when Pat's with me at a workshop because she's taught those levels. But yes, but it would be a different, it would be simple strategies. So it might be, I'm trying to think, see, I'm not familiar with the first grade curriculum. Any first grade teachers still in the room be able to throw some ideas up there? Maybe like something with initial consonant sounds, or word families, or what would we do with first? See, I don't know the curriculum. If I knew the first grade curriculum, I could tell you, 20 things probably you could do with it. I'm sure you can use it at that grade. You might want to have a teacher's aide or assistant work with like a small guided group first when you're introducing it to them, but later they might be able to do it on their own. Somebody put rhyming words, yeah.
Sure. And so could you just repeat, what would be the criteria then for a showdown? Is it 2 items that they're going to debate or have a conversation about?
A showdown would be when it's a problem, like in math. It could be addition, subtraction, multiplication, division problem, like, but it's like one right answer. And it's going to be the kind of problem that most kids would take about the same amount of time, whereas like word problems, I don't usually do them as showdowns because you might have one kid that solves it in 10 seconds and somebody else takes 3 minutes. So I don't usually do those because I like more conversation and discussion on those. So it's more quick and easy. Maybe shapes. It might be like acute, obtuse, right angles. You have pictures of these angles and they flip over the cards and then they write down, is it acute, obtuse, or right. Somewhere I have an angle measurement showdown where they actually use a protractor and everybody has a set of cards and they measure the angle and then they write it on their board. So it's kind of quick and easy skill review where everybody can pretty much agree on the answer. It's not good for open-ended, because if it's an open-ended thing, then there's all this disagreement. No, yours isn't a good example of that. No, it could be spelling of words. It can be, you can do spelling showdown. It's just that the person who's calling the word doesn't spell it, but everybody else does. You could do definitions, like you have science definitions on a card, and the kids already know that it's going to be, you know, these could be from any of these 10 vocabulary words, and then they write the word. So it's not good for lengthy responses. Does that help?
Okay. That is very helpful. Yes, thank you. I think that covers it. So
okay, well that's great. I've enjoyed it. As I said, I apologize. This is absolutely the longest I've ever gone over in a webinar. But I'm very passionate about cooperative learning, and I know I'm not going to come back and try to do a part 3. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to push through this, and they can watch it later if, you know, if they want. So thanks everybody for hanging in there. We still have 80 people hanging in there in the room, and I really appreciate it, especially those of you that are already back at school and those who are on vacation still and gave up some vacation time. Thanks so much, and hopefully everybody won't have any problem getting to that certificate. Okay, good night everybody. So I guess everybody can just click their red